Hi there. Today, for Algebra 1, we'll be looking at scatter plots and trend lines, Chapter 5-7. So, a couple things to start. There are three different kinds of correlation, and I need you to write these down and learn them, remember them, all right? And I'll show you how I remember them. The first one is positive correlation, which is a graph that looks like this one here. And you can see that, the points are in general going up and to the right, okay? And that's what we call positive correlation, which means, if I was to throw a line in between there, just kind of a general line, it would go up and to the right. And you'll notice that that line has positive slopes, so you've already got those slopes memorized. So that's why it has positive correlation, because that line would have positive slope. And you can see that the line kind of fits in between those points. It's never going to hit all those points because this has to do with real life data. And when you have real life data, nothing's ever perfect, all right? It's going to be just generally in that vicinity, okay? So anyway, we're not doing the trend line yet. That comes later. But you can see the positive correlation. Now this one over here is negative correlation. And similarly, if I was to throw a line in between those, that would have negative slope, okay? And that's why it has negative correlation. And they're grouped together, those points are in the general same grouping, okay? Which is why I know that there is negative correlation there. Now the last one is where there's no correlation, and you can see that the points are really just kind of randomly scattered around the graph, okay? So there's no way for me to determine where a trend line, is what that's called, would go. Because you could say it goes this way, but you could also say it goes this way, and there's no, the points are just so generally scattered around that you couldn't possibly figure out where the next one's going to be, okay? So anyway, those are your three different kinds of correlation, all right? I need you to become familiar with them. Also, these two terms are the same thing, trend line and lines of best fit, okay? And that's what I was just throwing in there, were those lines in between the points in a general way, okay? And we'll get more into that. But if I throw a line in there, that's called a line of best fit or a trend line. And what it really is supposed to do is minimize the vertical distance between the points. It's not about hitting as many points as you can. It's about fitting in between them. So if I asked you to draw a trend line in there, you'd put one that would be something like that. Now, the one that I would draw and somebody else would draw could be slightly different. Yours might be up here a little bit, maybe mine's down here, but they should be in this general vicinity, all right? Right in the middle of those points is the idea, okay? So it's not going to be a perfect thing, but they all should be kind of close, all right? And maybe there's a slightly different angle, but hopefully you get the idea. So that's how you draw a trend line. And if I asked you to draw one, you just kind of throw it in between the points, hopefully minimizing the vertical distance. And the vertical distance would be, the distance between the points. So this would be your vertical distance between those two and those two, all right? So anyway, hopefully you get the idea. All right, so, oops, I lost a point. Anyway. So those are my three different kinds of correlation. I'm only actually doing two problems. The first one I'll show you how to do, and the second one's a you try today. So the problem is this. I got some data up here that has to do with altitude and temperature. And the question says, make a scatter plot, and then B is, what type of relationship does the scatter plot show? And then C is, draw a trend line, and what is the equation of the trend line, okay? So this is the data up here. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points, all right? So I'm going to draw that, and then I'm going to draw a trend line in there, and then I'm going to show you how to figure out the equation of the trend line. So I've already created a little graph over here, and I'm looking at the data, and I see I have to go from 0 to 4,000. That's going to be on my x-axis. The other axis is going from 26 to 59, okay? So obviously you don't have to be perfect with these, but you should have your numbers, going so that you can fit all the data in there. So I'm going to go by tens up my x-axis. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and go all the way up to 70. On the x-axis here, that was my y-axis, and I'm going to label that. That should be labeled also. It says temperature, so that the reader knows what is on each axis. Okay. The other axis, I'm going to have altitude. And I'm going to go by 500 so that I can get up to 5,000 eventually. 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. All right, so there we go. And there's my graph. Now I'm going to start plotting my points. All right, so the first point I need is 0, 59. So 0, 59, that's going to be right on my y-axis, 0, 59. So that's about here. All right, and the next one is 559.2. So if I draw that one, 559.2, that's about in the same height. So I'm just going to throw it there. And you know, with decimals, you're just going to approximate. So that, I mean, it's just below 60. Okay, 1,061.3 is next. So 1,000 is here, and 61.3 is above 60, so somewhere around here. And the next one I got is 2,041.6. 2,000 is here. 41.6 is approximately here. The next one I got is 3,500 and 29.8, so that's pretty much 30. About here. And the next one is 4,026.2. 26.2, somewhere around here. All right, so there's my points. All right, and that's part A, is making the scatter plot. Okay, scatter plot's got your points all around it. The next one is what's the correlation? What's the relationship? And that's asking for the correlation. So if I'm going to draw a trend line in here, which I think I'm going to do, you know, it's about throwing it right between the points, really. So it doesn't have to necessarily hit all the points. That's not necessarily the objective. But if I throw it down here like that, that's pretty good. Okay. And make it move over just slightly. That's probably, yeah, there we go. All right, so there's my my trend line, which means, does it have positive correlation, negative correlation, or relatively no correlation? Well, clearly the points are like in a general way going down and to the right. So I would definitely say it has a correlation, and since that line has negative slope, I would say that it has negative correlation. Okay, negative correlation. And next I'm going to come up with the equation for the trend line. Okay, so the equation of the trend line. So we already know that with any line, I need two things. I need the slope and I need the y-intercept. We're going to start with the y-intercept because that's actually pretty easy. So I'm looking at where would that line hit the y-axis, which would be like here. All right, if I was to continue that a little bit. So we can just approximate. That looks like it's about 65, 64. It's between 60 and 70 clearly, so you can kind of approximate. I'm going to say 64. And now I got to find the slope. So the good thing about slope is we have an equation. And you should have this equation memorized. It's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And I need 2 points now. So I have a couple points. I actually made my trend line hit 2 points there. I can use these two right here. It hit both of those. So the 4,000 point was 4,026.2. And this point right next to it is the 3,500 point, which is 3,529.8. And there I have my 2 points. And now I can plug those in here into my slope formula and figure out the slope. So make this point x1, y1. This one can be x2, y2. Plug the numbers in. I go y2 is 26.2 minus y1 is 29.8. x2 is 4,000. And x1 is 3,500. All right, now I'm just going to punch these into my calculator here and figure out what I got here. So I'm kind of running out of space, so I'm going to go down there. Okay, so when I subtract those numbers, I get negative 3.6 over 500. And if I punch those into my calculator and divide them, I get negative 0.0072. So that's my slope, is negative 0.0072 here. So I'm going to write that up top here with my equation, negative 0.0072. And now I have the slope and I have the y-intercept, so my equation is going to be y equals negative 0.0072 x plus 64. And that is the equation of the trend line. Okay. Now, I know you guys are used to having like slopes that are usually, regular fractions, but sometimes you get those decimals like that, especially when you do with real world kind of problems, all right? So that's the problem I want you to do, and I want you to do one of these down here, and this one has something to do with you, because instead of using temperature and altitude, this one has to do with scores, quiz scores, and practice quiz scores. And believe it or not, as the years go by, I've noticed a big type of relationship between the scores that students put on how they do on their practice quiz compared to how they do with their real quiz. The more time they spend on their practice quiz, there's a relationship with what happens to their real quiz score. So I'd like you to do this problem here and bring it in to me, okay? Do the same thing we just did, make a scatter plot, figure out what the type of relationship is, and then draw a trend line and find the equation of the trend line, all right? So you do that and bring it in to me, and this will be the second part of the assignment. Have a great night. I'm going to close it out with a little bit more music, and I'll see you all soon.